Don't worry, my introduction is not 400 pages long. Just 3 small pieces of notes. Good morning. 7 years ago, it's not 7 years ago, just 3 years ago, in 2007, I had my first experience in Burkina Faso that George accurately described as a traditional aid experience where the IFAD project I was evaluating had been implementing, activities, $16 million worth of activities over 7 years, and the whole team was pretty frustrated with that. Our co-created evaluation produced one recommendation to IFAD, which was let's move away from numbered targets to more encouragement for learning and quality in the approach. I stayed in Burkina Faso long enough in 2010 to see the second project that IFAD launched in Burkina Faso. It was a $20 million project with the same focus and targets that had been multiplied by 4. So just to make the point that not only the traditional aid system is not working, it's not learning very much. We believe at EWB that accelerating wealth creation is about rethinking that system, rethinking development, hence the theme of the day. That liberating actors, that rethinking development is about liberating actors to help them deliver better services to their clients and synchronize with their community. And I think we have a few of those actors around in the room, actually. MTZL, Rent to Own, Profit, Advance Projects, l'UGCPA, la FEPACI, l'Union des producteurs de Yako, the Tamale and the Bongo district governments that take the challenge to actually learn and not just implement, but innovate and synchronize with their community. So today is not about delving into the fact that aid doesn't work, but actually engaging in rethinking and creating development so that wealth is accelerated. So hence it is most appropriate that Eric Beinhocker opens this day with a keynote, given his radical rethinking of economics and insights on complexity and the evolution principles to economics and wealth creation. Eric Beinhocker is a senior fellow of the McKinsey Global Institute. I will not list all the titles that he has. You can read them on the paper. He has written a book, The Origin of Wealth, which is 400 pages of insights on how our traditional thinking is actually misleading us to believe that our system can still be mechanical, linear, planned. And those ideas are very relevant to what we see on the ground, what EWB staff are seeing on the ground in Africa. So because the previous speaker was from Google, yesterday night I went on Google and I typed Eric Beinhocker and got 15,000 hits, I think. So then I said, well, I need to narrow that down. I put Eric Beinhocker outstanding achievements. I got 2,500 hits. So then I said, well, I'm going to do an advanced search only for PDFs that are most read for the same keywords, and got 500, which is still pretty impressive. I haven't done that with my name. And please don't do it. I couldn't help, so I read the book over Christmas, and that was a treat. But I couldn't help smiling when in the preface or the forewords of the book, Eric wrote that the book was written for 3 audiences. The first one is business people, investors, policymakers, so the shapers of this world. The second audience was people interested in economics and social issues, and the third one was academics and students. And I said, well, if you take the DNA of those 3 groups and mix them, you get an EWB member. So Eric, thank you very much for accepting to join the EWB community today, for coming and sharing your ideas with us, and to help us rethink development and apply complexity to this wicked issue. Eric.
Good morning, and thank you for that extremely kind introduction. And I have to say I'm a little bit daunted coming after the passionate stories of the EWB people, the courage and insight of John Githongo, and the incredible innovation that Megan Smith of Google showed. Now you've got a guy in a dark suit and tie who's going to talk to you about the dismal science of economics for the next 20 or 30 minutes. So this might be a bit of a shock to everyone's system. I'd also just like to congratulate all of you here on the incredible work you're doing. I also went on Google before this and did a little bit of looking at the work that EWB and its partners are doing, and it really is amazing, so I'm very honored to be here. The purpose of this talk is really a conversation starter. I'm going to talk about some ideas that are shaking up the field of economics. George earlier talked about change, that the economy that we have today is not the economy that we need. It's not, that the economy has to change. It has to deliver more justice, more development, and many other things. And what I'm going to talk about is new thinking on how economies change, how they evolve and change over time. And John Githongo also talked about the messiness of economic development, and you've all experienced that messiness, the reality on the ground, and how economics is trying to get messier and trying to grapple with a more realistic view of the economy. Now, I should caveat this by saying that this is all still pretty speculative, and in particular in terms of what it means for development. These ideas are still relatively new in economics, and so when I talk about development, it is going to be highly speculative, and I should also say that you're the experts on development, not me. So my purpose is really to throw some ideas out there for provocation and to start a debate which hopefully will be productive over the coming days. So as was mentioned, this talk is derived from work in my book, so there's lots more detail in the book because we're only going to be able to hit some of the highlights today. I thought I'd start with this quote from Einstein, that we cannot solve problems by using the same kind of thinking we used when we started them. And in the current environment, the economic crisis around the world has been a huge earthquake on many dimensions, but one dimension has been it has really shaken up the field of economics, that there is a fundamental rethinking going on about our understanding of the economy, how it works, and our ideas from that. And the theories that we've had in economics for literally over the last century that have been so fundamental to economic policy, including ideas on development, is going through a radical rethink. And I'm going to talk about a couple of things. First, I'm going to start off with just a few facts to set the stage. I always think it's a good idea to have a few facts in the room. And these are a couple of facts that I think help show some of the issues with traditional economic thinking. And then I'm going to step back and ask a very basic question. What is the economy? When we use this word, what do we mean? What kind of a system is it? What does it do? And then I'm going to talk a little bit about how the economy changes, about this idea of the economy as an evolutionary system, and in particular the idea that the economy is a set of designs that change over time, and I'll talk more about what that means. But it should be language that actually clicks pretty well with engineers. And then lastly, I'm going to offer a few speculative thoughts on what this all might imply for development. So first, just a couple of facts to warm us up. Fact number one is that if you look over a very long time in world history, that the wealth of the world hasn't gone through a nice kind of linear progression, but it's rather grown rather explosively. So I'm going to go back pretty far in time. So this is world GDP per capita from 2.5 million BC to present. Now, as an economist, I have to be honest with you, the statistics back at 2.5 million BC are a little bit speculative, a little bit ropey, but we've done our best on the data collection. And actually, it's semi-serious. There's an economist at Berkeley, Brad DeLong, who actually went back through the archaeological records and all sorts of data sources to do an admittedly very rough estimate. But we know a lot about the material standards of living through history, what kind of stone tools people had, what kind of foods they ate and calories and so on. And so we can do a very rough estimate. So the economic history of the world is this. For a long time, we were really poor, and then all hell broke loose. So let's kind of zoom in on the very recent past, say 15,000 years. Now, 15,000 BC is significant because that's when settled agriculture began to take off in various places of the world. And you see, again, this same pattern, that even as settled agriculture got established, wealth only sort of inched up a bit, and then you have this vertical takeoff in very recent history. So let's zoom in on this last bit, and we see, again, it looks like an incredibly vertical curve, and starting around 1750. Now, what happened in 1750? Well, we know the Industrial Revolution happened in 1750. And there we see this just huge takeoff in wealth, again, per capita. Now, we should note that this is all happening in about 1/3 of the world. That this vertical line is happening about 1/3 of the planet, and about 2/3 is basically staying on that bottom lower level. But we have to ask the question, why? Why did all of a sudden, after this, literally millions of years of, kind of trundling along, this huge change and liftoff happened for 1/3 of the world, and now in the 21st century, with China and India's development in Brazil, it's beginning to happen in another 1/3, but then we still have a 1/3, largely in Africa and South Asia, where it's still not happening. So this at least raises some questions. Next fact is that as this takeoff in wealth per capita in parts of the world happened, that the complexity of their economies grew dramatically. So now retailers have a measure of the variety of products and services in an economy. So, how many different, blue jeans does a shop sell, or how many different types of food does a grocery store sell, called stock keeping units, or SKUs. And anthropologists have gone into hunter-gatherer societies and cultures that are representative of how the world existed for most of its history, and added up, how many different tools and baskets and different, material things that they have. And it's usually on the order of in the hundreds or thousands. But if you go and look at a modern economy like Toronto or New York, you find that, I do an estimate in the book, it's on the order of 10 to the 10. Just as an example, a Walmart has 100,000 different types of things in it. Not, volume of things, but variety. Cable TV, we can watch 200 channels and there's still never anything good on. And my favorite statistic, that there's 275 different breakfast cereals you can choose from. Now, separate from the question of does the world need 275 breakfast cereals, we can at least ask, why did we get this huge, creation in variety in the economy? And just to put this in perspective, biologists estimate that the variety of the biosphere, the number of different species, is on the order of 10 to the 6, 10 to the 7. So in a very short period of time, the economy has created more innovation and variety than the ecosystem of the planet. And fact number 3 is that all of this happened with no one in charge. There's no one who runs the economy. It's a bottom-up, emergent, self-organizing process going on around the world. Now, if those are just a couple of, actually fairly sort of obvious and straightforward facts about the economy, what does that say about what type of a system that we're dealing with? Well, traditional economics cannot explain actually those 3 facts that I just showed you. That traditional economics views the economy as something like this, what scientists and engineers call an equilibrium system, a system that has a set of forces at work on it, sort of indicated by the sides of the bowl or constraints, a set of forces like gravity, pulling the system into a particular place where it comes to rest in balance, in equilibrium. And this notion of equilibrium has been fundamental to economics for about 100 years now, and its most obvious illustration is the law of supply and demand. That markets work where you have a set of consumer preferences, a set of technologies from businesses. It all comes into clearance and balance. There's prices set, and the market clears in supply and demand. Now, the problem is this notion of the economy as an equilibrium system just doesn't square with the three facts that I just showed you and many other things. That equilibrium systems don't grow explosively. They don't create novelty and variety, and they don't also spontaneously self-organize. And so economics has traditionally had to reach outside itself and just say, well, that innovation stuff is all happening, outside the economy. And in my view, at least, that's actually taking the really interesting stuff and kind of putting it outside the field. And quite critically, these kind of equilibrium systems don't do what we've just experienced. They don't crash. Or I like John Guthanga's image of the blue screen coming up, saying that the system crashed. And that's what, in fact, happened in 2007, 2008. And the traditional equilibrium economics does not offer satisfactory explanations for what we've just experienced. Now, starting a couple of decades ago, but building on work that's been bubbling along for quite a long time in economics, a number of economists and other social scientists and also physicists and engineers and chemists and computer scientists have been working on some other explanations of how the economy might work. So these aren't my own theories. These are rather collecting ideas across literally hundreds of researchers. And the notion that they've been examining is that the economy is not an equilibrium system, but is what scientists call a complex adaptive system. It's complex in that it's made up of lots of interacting agents or parts or particles. You can think of the human brain, the internet, a forest ecosystem. These are all distributed networked systems. That it's adaptive in that the agents or participants in that system aren't static, that they don't stay still, that they're changing over time, developing new strategies and evolving, and that we also need to understand it as a system. That if you look just at the individual parts, you don't get the full picture, that you see macro patterns emerging out of the micro behavior. So think of if you take an individual water molecule itself, it may not be very interesting, but if you put enough of them together in the right circumstances, you get a whirlpool, an emergent pattern that may persist even as the individual components of it are changing over time. And the interesting thing about these complex adaptive systems is that they have common characteristics, that we can actually see things in a system like the internet or a forest ecosystem or the human brain that actually have some very strong similarities. And the idea is that the economy actually fits this kind of definition much better than it fits the definition of an equilibrium system. Now let me give just some illustration of what it might mean to think of the economy as a complex adaptive system. Well, first you have lots of agents in the system, people, individuals, all heterogeneous, different, interacting with each other, buying and selling, trading, exchanging information, interacting in all sorts of ways. And traditional economics tends to not look at this level of disaggregation. It sort of lumps everyone in together. The models that the U.S. Treasury was using during the crisis had one consumer in them, because everyone's the same and thinks the same way, and so we can just view it as one consumer. This approach breaks things down, looks at the things at the individual level. Second is we also know that these individuals don't just interact with each other kind of one-on-one, but also come together and form organizations, groups, businesses, government institutions. They organize, and those organizations tend to have some structure, often hierarchy to them, and they have some coherence, some notion of strategy, of everyone working together for some common goals. And those organizations of agents also interact with their environment, and as they interact with the environment, they change, they adapt, the people change, the strategies change, and the CEO just got fired. I don't know if you saw that, that they're not static either. And then, just zooming out to a whole nother level, that we have these larger scale structures, we might call industries or sectors of organizations interacting in very complex and dense networks, and that those change and innovate over time. And we have new sectors coming in and old sectors departing as the economy changes. And then finally, just to kind of zoom out one last time, this starts to look like, just as the label says, a complex a system that's highly dynamic over time, and it looks very different from the sort of equilibrium balanced view of traditional economics. And so then, the question is, can we actually understand this kind of a system much more deeply, and can we, use that understanding to help us, design better policies and more effective organizations and help the system work better? So I'm just going to now briefly contrast the differences between this view of the world and the traditional economic view. Now, normally I would spend actually a lot more time on this, but because we're pressed for time, I'm just going to do it at a very summary level. And apologies, this may be a little bit hard to read for those in the back. But traditional economics, again, views the economy in a very static equilibrium way. This is a much more dynamic view. The traditional view is that we can assume away the differences in individuals and in agents, whereas here we take a much more heterogeneous view. Also, you've probably heard a lot about behavioral economics. Traditional economics has this very bizarre view that we're all these incredible calculating machines that make decisions perfectly every day. I certainly know I don't work that way. Whereas this view takes a realistic view of human behavior, that humans may not make perfect decisions, but we're actually pretty good at recognizing patterns, we're good at learning, and we're brilliant at social interaction. Also, this theory looks at the economy as a network, that there is network structure to the economy, and that network structure matters in how the economy functions. Whereas traditional economics assumes that all interactions are done through the market, that the economy runs like a giant eBay, and again, we know that that's not true. And then, as I mentioned before, that the notion that a lot of the macro behavior we see, booms and busts in the economy, crashes in stock markets, unemployment, economic growth and development, that these macro patterns emerge out of the micro behaviors. And then lastly, that the system is evolutionary, that there is that there's innovation and novelty being created from inside the system. Now, I'm going to spend a few minutes on that last point of what does it mean for the economy to evolve? How does it evolve? And for many of us, the word evolution is linked to biology. We think of the picture of apes and then getting taller, and then some guy in a suit like me, with a briefcase or something, and that the notion that social systems can also have evolutionary characteristics has been around for a long time, actually since Darwin, but only recently has it been sort of more thoroughly developed, and to a large extent because we have computers now. Because evolution is, in essence, an algorithm. It's a computer program. It's software. It's a way of searching for what evolutionary theorists call fit design. And so you can think of, you've got a space of possible designs for something, say, possible designs for a chair. We could make lots of varieties of chair. Some will be good, some will be, bad by some set of criteria. So you need some mechanism to create variety. And then you need some selection criteria for deciding what is a fit design and what's a less fit design. So for a chair, it might be it's comfortable to sit in, it's attractive, it's inexpensive to make, what have you. But the key thing is that there's just some notion of differential fitness. And then lastly, there's some process for amplifying the fit designs, making more of whatever it is that's fit and less of what isn't, and then we repeat. And this very simple recipe, this algorithm, is at work in biological systems and has led to the incredible innovation and variety and ingenuity of design that we see in the natural biological world. And a growing number of economists say, well, this is also characteristic of what happens in many aspects of economic development as well, that there's a huge amount of variation of trial and error that goes on in the economy that can be characterized as an evolutionary system. And just to give you an example, think about how did we get the modern bicycle? Where did that come from? That's a design. We have a design, for a modern bicycle. How did we get that? Well, you'd say, well, people did it. Human designers, engineers, hurrah! Our heroes, designed these bicycles. And the reply would be, yes, that's true. There is human agency in this, intention, people who wanted to design bicycles, but the way they were doing it could be characterized as an evolutionary process. And it happens through what I call in the book deductive tinkering, where people use both the deductive problem-solving part of our brain, the part of your brain that went to engineering school, but also use the tinkering part, the experimentation, the trying stuff part, because we don't know what's going to work in advance. So if you actually look at the history of the evolution of the bicycle, what you find is, people started experimenting with human-wheeled transportation kind of back in Victorian, era when they had, metals and new materials to work with. And they tried all sorts of different designs. You've probably seen these sort of ones with the giant front wheels and three-wheel bicycles and so on. And the reason was because nobody could sit down, even the smartest engineer couldn't sit down and from first principles say, this is the optimal bicycle. Designing the optimal bicycle is an impossible problem. Instead, what you have to do is design the best bicycle you can think of, and then try it and see if it works, and try it against other competing designs for bicycles and see if they work any better. And so you have this variation, selection, and amplification process, and the bicycles that people liked more got made of those, and then more variants were made of those, and the ones that, the ones with the big wheels you don't see, on the streets much anymore because they're pretty hard to ride. And so on. So you have this process of trying to build the best bicycle you can, experimenting with it, selecting ones that work better than others, and amplifying or scaling up the ones that work. And so you get this kind of evolutionary pattern in technology design. And historians of technology have shown this kind of process going on in everything from ox-drawn plows to microchips to horse stirrups and saddles, all sorts of things. And so this is a pretty good description of progress in technology. Now, I argue in the book that this evolutionary process is not just happening in what might be called the physical technologies that we have, but is also happening equally importantly in our social technologies. And this is exactly what John talked about, hardware and software. This is the software side. And John is absolutely right. The software is equally important, or maybe even arguably more important than the hardware. And our social structures also go through this deductive tinkering process. So, we start off in history with, hunter-gatherer groups, and then, settled agricultural groups, the formation of cities and towns, and so on. And you're going up into the Industrial Revolution, the creation of inventions like the joint stock company, which I would argue was as big an invention in the Industrial Revolution as the steam-driven machinery. You have more recent social inventions in the business world like venture capital, for example. And we also have social innovation in the worlds of government, invention of money, the rule of law. These institutional innovations, they haven't existed forever. They were invented, and they've evolved. They've been tinkered with and evolved over time. So these social technologies are key as well. And then we also have a group that links these together in economic activity, which are businesses. And these can be anything from a small, local business to a giant global corporation. But even, an individual running a shoe shine stand has a set of physical technologies they're working with and some social, organization that they're using to do it, all the way up to IBM. And in the book, I call these, business plans. These are designs for economic activity for businesses, and these evolve as well. And so you've seen that, in the history of economic activity, the notion of what is business has changed dramatically as well. So if we bought this idea of how the economy works, what would it look like? Well, evolutionary systems do go through these nonlinear periods of kind of bursts of innovation and activity. And you see this in the biological record of the Cambrian explosion and other periods. And in some sense, the Industrial Revolution was an economic Cambrian explosion. That evolutionary systems don't proceed in a smooth way, but rather in this kind of bumpy, nonlinear way. Also, evolutionary systems are variety creation machines, innovation machines, that they just as, again, the biosphere has increased in complexity and variety over time, we've seen a similar pattern in the economy. And likewise, evolution, this very simple algorithm happens in a very bottom-up way. You don't need somebody top-down to run it. Now, in the economy, we have lots of people who think they're running things. I'm sure that the leaders of EWB will be sympathetic with the notion that they sometimes think they're running the place, but it may not always be true. And any organization, even though you may have strategies and direction, some hierarchy, there's a lot happening bottom up that actually really drives the shape of the organization and how it performs, this spontaneous self-organization. So what's the bottom line here? What does it mean? Well, evolutionary processes, if you really get to the heart of it, what they do is they create knowledge. Evolution is a learning system that we learn through experimentation, through trial and error, seeing what works, what doesn't work. Now, it's not a random process. Now, I should note, the biological world, a lot of this happens randomly through mutation and sexual selection and so on. But in the economic world, we're doing it with human purpose. When we go out and design as an engineer, if you design a product or service, you're trying to make a good one, or if you're a consumer trying to buy something, you're trying to buy what's going to make you satisfied and so on. And that's not inconsistent with evolution. It just means that the process of evolutionary search is different in economies than in biology, but it's still, at the end of the day, creating knowledge. And that knowledge is then exploited through complex social structures. I mean, it doesn't matter, if you had a lot of knowledge about what's a good bicycle, it wouldn't do the world much good. But if you get a bunch of people together to build your good bicycle, then, well, people have an easier way of getting around, and it's a good, it's a good thing. So you need these complex social structures to exploit that knowledge. And at the end of the day, the ultimate origin of wealth is knowledge. It's not raw materials, it's not even our own labor, but it's how we put all these things together, how we bring the resources the world offers, the passion and energy of our labors, and the knowledge that people have together. That's what creates rising standards of living and improving lives. So now a little bit of speculation on what this view of economics means for development. Now first I should just caveat this, but more generally, that I think that these ideas have the potential to shake things up in a pretty big way on just some very fundamental views on what is the role of government, what's the role of policy, and so on. And we've had this kind of basic framing for a long time of going back to Marx and Smith of the free marketeers versus the sort of state interventionists. And people have asked me, is this view of economics, is it more sympathetic to the left or the right? And I say neither. It's a different frame. It has actually relatively little to do with these debates. It's a different way of looking at things. And just to give an example, and I'm going to characterize very badly, a traditional left view of the economy would say that markets may be necessary, but don't produce just outcomes, and so we need states as an essential mechanism to intervene and protect people from market failures and create social justice. A sort of cartoon view of folks on the right would say, markets are the most efficient mechanism for allocating resources, and states need to kind of get out of the way because they distort market outcomes and are less efficient. And this same broader battle that goes on in politics also has gone on in the world of development as well, and tensions between how much focus there should be on states and social justice versus markets and activating business activity. This view would say we're asking the wrong questions, that this framing just isn't right. That in an evolutionary sense, the markets are not efficient. Evolutionary systems are not efficient. In fact, they're hugely wasteful. And they're often not directed in any particular direction other than the internal logic themselves. But what they are incredibly good at is innovation and wealth creation. So we should be looking at market effectiveness rather than efficiency, and markets' roles in creating innovation. But that also markets don't exist in a vacuum. You open an economics textbook and it's almost like, and God said, let there be a market, and there was one. That markets don't come out of nowhere, that they are institutional creations. They are human creations. They live in a world of institutions, of laws, of governments, of, corruption or not corruption, of human behavior, and so on. And states are a major player in whether, business activity works or not. And so we need to view part of the state's role as creating the conditions for economic evolution to happen. And then also there's the direction that markets drive toward, this fitness function, if we view it that way, can also take into account social justice concerns. And again, the traditional argument on the right has been that these social justice concerns interfere with efficiency. And this view would say, no, in fact, they can help effectiveness. If we're also paying attention to social justice, it can help on the effectiveness side as well. So just to wrap up, now this is where I get into way out of my depth into some hypotheses on what this might mean for development. So if you re-ask the question, why are there poor countries in the world, looking at it through this lens, you get an answer that, well, this process that I've just described is broken. That economic evolution is not rooted, it's not working for various reasons in these countries. And then that makes us think then, well, maybe an important goal of development, maybe not, probably not the only goal, I'm sure, but an important goal is to help activate and accelerate these processes of differentiation, selection, and amplification, creating variety, creating mechanisms where economic activity that is meeting the needs of the people gets resources, and where successful economic activity can be scaled up. And when we think in my very anecdotal experiences in developing countries, actually the differentiation part is pretty good. There's huge variety creation, innovation, entrepreneurial energy. And I think that the mobile phone examples are a terrific example of that. But then when that entrepreneurial energy starts running into, well, can I succeed? Can my ideas attract money and capital? Can they get scaled up? Then we start running into issues of broken systems and states and distortions and corruption and all sorts of other reasons, and wars, and the list is a huge one of why that economic evolution system may not be functioning. It also gives a view that that a kind of mechanistic top-down approach is unlikely to succeed, that these systems are too messy, too complex. We can't predict enough the consequences of actions to be sure of a top-down planning approach. But rather thinking about, again, how do we activate these more bottom-up evolutionary processes? What can we do to create that success on the ground and then scale dramatically? Third, and again, John touched on this in his remarks, culture matters hugely. If you think of this as a system of agents at an individual agent, the rules of behavior at an individual level matter a lot. If you have one set of rules in a system, you're going to get one outcome. If you have another set of rules in another system, you're going to get another outcome. Now here we get into some tricky ground, because now I want to be clear, what I'm not saying is that there is one best culture any more than there is one best bicycle design. There are many different ways cultures can be economically successful, and we have examples of this. Norway and Japan are two generally, historically successful economies, but like chalk and cheese in terms of culture. Couldn't be more different. But it does raise the question of, can you have aspects in a culture that hurt economic activity and hurt development. And there's been some interesting work going on in this question, and it can range from things like, attitudes towards defining what your family is, which is an interesting one because that affects capital formation and savings. There is an interesting history of why does Holland have so many of the biggest corporations in the world, even though it's a tiny, tiny country. And it's because this one researcher said the Dutch are mean to their families. I hope I haven't offended any Dutch people here. But that, in the history of Holland, that, the definition of a family was a pretty tight one. And so that meant they had to create social structures for creating trust outside of a very small family unit that then, led to complex organizational structures and legal forms and things like that. And so mechanisms for creating trust, for creating productive interactions and so on are often very culturally specific. And if you look at some of the most successful corporations in the world, they've done an interesting job of mixing local culture and some more global culture. So if you go to Infosys in India, there's no question it's an Indian company. It has Indian culture. It is Indian. But there's a strong whiff of Silicon Valley in the air as well. And that they've sort of adopted and mutated and evolved something different, something new, a hybrid that's been immensely successful. And then lastly, that, and again, John said this better than I will, we can't separate the physical and social technologies, the hardware and software. And, we have to, that technology transfer is incredibly important in economic development, and Google gave some brilliant cases of the power of that, but also, as I'm sure the Google folks would violently agree with, it has to be in the context of the society and the social structures that exist there, and we need to help create the social structures that can actually use these technologies in an effective way. And then that this idea of social technology evolution can't be shortcut. And we've seen some disastrous examples of this, of where we try to parachute in to countries social structures or ways of organizing society that are alien to those cultures and are not consistent with their path of evolution and just fail and don't work. So rather, the message is we have to start with the social technologies we have today, but then figure out how you might be able to accelerate their own evolutionary path in an economically productive way. And then, just as my last remark, there's hope. That this view of the economy says that there is no fundamental reason why Africa or parts of South Asia or any other part of the world should be poorer or less developed than the rest, than other parts of the world. That economies do evolve. They can evolve actually very, very quickly. And we've seen some examples of some countries that have developed, made amazing progress and developed rapidly. And that if we more deeply and better understand these processes of economic change and how real economies in the messy world work, rather than the sort of neat theoretical understanding that we've had for many decades now, that we may come up with new ideas on how to do this much more effectively and deliver much better lives to billions of people around the world. So just to conclude, I loved the symbol for this conference, which I read was Ndinkra, meaning creativity and complexity, and I think that is exactly the same spirit behind this view of the economy, that we need to harness both the creativity and innovation processes in the economy and then social structures that allow us to exploit that and create prosperity for people around the world. Thank you very much.
I wanted to thank Eric for a very stimulating conversation, or kick off a conversation with some really, really stimulating thoughts. And I had a chance to read The Origin of Wealth about a year ago, I think. And as people who know me will recognize, as soon as I was sort of halfway through it, I was already recommending the book to everyone. I'd pre-ordered 3 more copies of it because I knew someone would take my copy. And it's very dog-eared and has a lot of ideas underlined. And when I was chatting with Eric to kick off sort of the idea of why I thought it would be valuable to have him here, I said, Engineers Without Borders has a lot of smart people in it. And I want you to aim your talk at the smartest 30 people in the room and make their heads hurt. And I was sitting there, and I've read the book, and he made my head hurt again as I was trying to apply some of these ideas of differentiation, selection, multiplication, social technologies. What does all this mean for the practice that we do of development? So thanks very much, Eric. And I wanted to just thank all 3 speakers that we had today to kick off our conference. We wanted to bring together speakers who we said we want 3 speakers who would never share the stage together in any other venue than an Engineers Without Borders conference. And we have an inspiring leader from Kenya who is not just talking the talk, but walking the walk of how do you find new ways of doing things, and how do you address some of these core cultural and social issues of corruption, and how do you mobilize people against that. We had Megan Smith, who is bringing the optimism and the opportunity of mobile phones and of information and of the role that engineers can play in society to bring that practical problem solving to bear on some of the most pressing issues that we face in the world. And we had Eric talk about economic evolution, how wealth is created, and how that fundamentally can rethink some of the processes of development that we have primarily, as we're talking about, in Africa today. And the common theme is change. It's that willingness to question the world that we see around us. It's that willingness to question the status quo in development. It's that willingness to question the status quo of the engineering profession and to find new and appropriate knowledge that the engineers are going to have to incorporate in order to apply their problem-solving skills for the 21st century. And we also are willing to fundamentally question the status quo of the oversimplification of the problems of development and the challenges of Africa. This oversimplification that we see runs rampant in Canada and the West in the media today, and to be willing to embrace some of the complexities in order to be able to get to the heart of the answers.